I was in Singapore a number of years ago for 3 days on business, and I was just exhausted at the end of it. And I jumped on this flight coming home at night time. All I wanted to do was get on one of those 3 seats where there's no one, just lay down and go to sleep. And I got on this plane and it's packed. And I sit beside this guy who was about 28 years old. He was Lebanese. He was first generation Lebanese, born in Australia, but he had the great big black beard, the shaved head, and he looked like a terrorist, right? And I'm sitting beside him, and I didn't want to talk to him. I just wanted to go to sleep and talk to nobody. And I made a fatal mistake. I looked at him and said, "G'day." And I don't know quite how this happened, but for the next 7 hours, all the way home, I shared Jesus stories with him. Now, this man had just been in Germany, highly intelligent, trained in something or other, physics or something or other, and he was an atheist, but he had a Catholic background. And somehow this conversation about Jesus, and I just shared stories for 7 hours as he asked questions about what Jesus had done in the lives of the people in my world. At the end of the flight, when we got back to Australia, I was so energised. I got on the plane tired and I got off so energised. And I was thinking, how can what we've been sharing together continue in this man's life? Because he's obviously searching and open and hungry. So I offered to give him this book that I was reading called Driven by Eternity. I wanted to give him something. He said, nah, mate, I don't want it. And so we said our fond farewells and walked away from each other. And I'd gone downstairs, I was catching a train out to Campbelltown, Sydney, and he was in the toilets. And as we were walking out of the toilet, he came up to me and says, "Hey, mate, I want to tell you why I didn't want your book, because your book will not change me." He said, "Only meeting other Christians like you that will tell me Jesus stories, that's the only thing that will change me." I don't know the rest of the story. I only know I had a little part somewhere in one person's life that day. And over the years, I've had people share with me how much they want someone they love to experience those Jesus stories where the supernatural happens and prayer is answered and miracles take place. And they tell me, if only the person I love could see that, I know they would believe and follow Jesus. I'm not convinced that that actually is true. When Jesus was here on earth, every miracle he did, whether public or privately, did not convince 2 groups of people that were skeptics. One were the religious leaders, never changed them, no matter what he did, and his own family. His own brothers did not believe he was who he said he was. In fact, when Jesus was brutally put to death on a cross, it just confirmed to his brothers what they had already believed, that he was not who he said he was. But an event called the resurrection changed James, changed his other brothers. James became a significant leader in the early church in Jerusalem. He died a martyr, believing that his brother really was who he said he was. Jesus didn't just sort of go to sleep on the cross and wake up and walk out of a tomb. He was dead. Like dead. The dead's really final. Like, I've had people die in my arms, and when someone is dead, they are dead. His brothers knew he was dead. His mother saw her son brutally, horrendously dead. Those Roman soldiers were very good at what they did. They didn't put a half-dead Jesus into a tomb. If you've seen enough death, you know dead is dead. It's very final. But when Jesus personally appeared to his brother James, alive, physically in front of him, and he answered his questions, he ministered to his brother, he cared for his brother, that changed James. It changed the way he thought. It changed his beliefs. His life purpose in that moment changed. Not by Jesus turning water into wine, not by healing a blind man so he could see, by an event called the resurrection. Growing up, my dad was a preacher. My grandfather was a preacher. And I have heard the Easter story many times. But just this week, I discovered a new treasure in this story that I've never seen before. Now, for some of you, it might be an old treasure, but for me, this is new. And I want to share it with you. And it's found in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Now, 1 Corinthians 15 is an amazing chapter. I would really encourage all of us to actually read it this week. It'll amaze you what Paul says. In there, Paul says that if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, we of all people on earth should be pitied more than anyone, because our invisible, imaginary friend is not real. This is what Paul says. And he tells us that Jesus, if he was not resurrected, Paul himself's a liar. And all the other apostles are con men. It's a scam. If Jesus did not come back to life. Paul hangs everything on the fact that Jesus raised from the dead. If this is not true, nothing is true of the Christian message. Nothing. He even says if Jesus didn't come back to life, he himself, who now just understand a little thing about Paul. Paul's a bit dramatic. And he says things like, hour by hour, my life's been in danger. And he says, in Ephesus, I had to fight ferocious animals. They were just people in the church there, right? But he's very dramatic. But he says, if Jesus did not come back to life, if he was not resurrected, I've just wasted everything. Like it's useless what I've done. I've gained nothing. And this is what Paul says. Listen to what he says. He says, it would be a whole lot better if we just lived like some Aussies live. Where this is his words, where we just simply say, let's just eat and drink, do whatever we want to because we're going to be dead one day. That's what Paul says. It'd be better to do that. Because there would be no purpose in life. There would be no morality. There'd be no right or wrong. There would be nothing after death. So why wouldn't you just do whatever you want to do? I want to quote what Paul says in this chapter. He says, your faith in God is futile if there's no resurrection. But then in verse 20, he flips it. And he says this, but Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. Both Jesus and Paul use this metaphor of just fallen asleep. No, they're dead. Why do they use this just fallen asleep? Because for Paul and for Jesus, there is no fear in death. It's just asleep. Because they see through a kingdom lens, understand how the kingdom works, God's big picture. I'm going to come back to that verse. But first, I want to show you what this new little treasure I found this week is. You're wondering, aren't you, Faye? You're hanging in there. I'm just building the tension up, right? In 1536, nearly 500 years ago, Anne Boleyn, who was the second wife of King Henry VIII, was beheaded, for high treason. She was 36 years old. And Thomas Cornwall, he brought the charges against her. Now, historians now believe that they were not true. But as she is about to face death, she declares her allegiance to the king. We believe that to be true, but there were less witnesses to Anne Boleyn's story than all the witnesses that saw Jesus resurrected. None of us were there when Jesus came back to life. None of us were there when Anne Boleyn was beheaded, when King Henry VIII is believed to have said on his deathbed that he was grieved with what had happened to his wife. But it never changed him. It didn't stop him doing it in the first place. But this event called the resurrection is not just historic information. It's not just a story you read. This transforms lives. It transformed James's life forever. Moved him from a skeptic to a fully blown, sold up, I'm following the boy. I'm following Big Brother Jesus. When we read the historic, factual account of Jesus being resurrected, and we read the factual, historic account of Lazarus coming back to life, there's a big difference between the two of them. And I've never seen that before until this week. Lazarus walked out of the grave with the same body that he went into the grave with. Well, he was dead when he went in, like he was alive when he came out. But if he was 40 years old when he was put into that thing, when he came out, he had a 40-year-old body, half done. If he was bald when he went in there, he came out bald. It's true. Like, how he went in is how he came out. Lazarus had 2 funerals. Jesus is the only person in history. I hope you're staying with us there, Faye. We haven't lost you completely. But Jesus is the only person in history who was resurrected. Who was the first person in history ever to get a brand new body that is eternal, that will not wear out, that is supernatural and yet physical. He could eat, when Cole was reading it, he ate food to prove to them he wasn't a ghost. Now, every detail in the Bible is there for a reason. So why do we know that Jesus instructed the eyewitnesses to Lazarus's coming back to life see, Lazarus was resuscitated. He came back to life. He was resuscitated 4 days after, but he's resuscitated. Jesus was resurrected. why is it important in the story of Lazarus that Jesus would say, can you roll away the stone? Why do we know that in the story of Lazarus, Jesus told them when Lazarus came out, he wasn't walking really well because he was all wrapped up, right? And why do we know this detail that Jesus says, unwrap the boy, release him? Why do we know that when the women were coming to the tomb that morning to try to somehow put this nice smelling stuff on Jesus' body, their big problem was, what are we going to do with the heavy stone? All us women can't move the stone. Why do we know the stone was so significant? Why do we know that when they got and found the grave empty, all the linen that had been wrapped around Jesus' body was all neatly there? Because Jesus had a new body. He didn't need someone to roll away the stone. He could physically have walked through that stone grave. If he can walk into a locked room, if he can appear and disappear in this new body, Jesus was resurrected. He wasn't just resuscitated. It's a significant difference because that new body, Lazarus didn't get one. And in our world today, there are approximately 600 people that have died and spent a lot of money to have their dead, diseased, decrepit body cryogenically frozen. In the hope that one day they may be resuscitated and come back to life in this broken, old, diseased body for a little bit longer. That's not our hope. That's what we don't hope for. Our hope is in a resurrected, brand new body that does amazing things. With hair. I don't know what age we're going to be looking like, but I have put my little wish list in for that new body. 33. That's a good age. Yes. I'll accept that. Just going back to that verse 20 in 1 Corinthians 15. I want to read it to you. It says, "But Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have died." The first fruits. The first fruits. First fruits, the ancient Greek word, apache, in Jewish culture, it was describing the first fruits offering. So when the harvest would come, they would take a sheaf of wheat and bring it to the temple and offer it as a sacrifice. It would be presented at the temple to God as a down payment, as they would bring it to God. They would expect God to bless the rest of the harvest. And God initiated this idea of first fruits, and they would bring their first fruits and he would bless the rest of the harvest. It was a guarantee that the harvest would be fruitful by bringing this first fruits thing. Now, Jesus' resurrection is a guarantee of our resurrection. First fruits, the Feast of First Fruits in the Jewish calendar happened once a year. And it was observed on the day after the Sabbath, followed by the Passover. Now don't miss this. Jesus rose from the dead on that exact day of first fruits, the day after the Sabbath, following the Passover. 365 days of the year he could have risen, but he rose on that day because he's the guarantee. He's the first fruits. If he is resurrected, we can be resurrected. If he was not resurrected, we have no life after death. He's the proof. Paul in that chapter begins with these facts. Jesus died. He was buried. He was resurrected. And he lists all the eyewitnesses that prove these facts. And not only were James and his brothers changed by this event called the resurrection, so was Paul. "41 times the word resurrection is in our New Testaments. Every time it isn't talking about Jesus, it's talking about an event yet to come when Jesus returns, when we will all be resurrected. And he's the first fruits. He's the guarantee for you, for me. I know at that resurrection, I'll be reunited with my mum and my dad and my grandparents because they were Jesus followers. That's why. See, at Aussie funerals, we try to make each other feel a bit better. We comfort each other by saying, hey, they're in a better place. How do we know that? On what basis are they in a better place? On what basis are they catching up with all the rallies that have gone before them? On what basis? The early church didn't say that. The early church comforted believers with the resurrection of the dead. And Jesus was the proof that that would happen. I want to read to you a little bit out of this chapter 15. And it's Paul describing this future event. And he says this, the body, he's talking about us, the body that is sown perishable is raised imperishable. It is sown in dishonour, it is raised in glory. Glory. It is glorious completeness. It is sown in weakness, it's raised in power. It is sown a natural body that's bald and it's raised with a spiritual body with hair. I don't know what's on your wish list. I'll finish with this thought. God exists outside of time in this reality that we call eternity. But time is God's gift to us. It's a gift. Inside time, we can make choices that change our future. If there's things in your past that you don't like, there's mistakes you've made, we can change. You can choose tomorrow to not eat another bit of chocolate. But today, just go for it. We have this capacity in time. We can change jobs. We can sell houses. You can change where you live. You can change and walk away from friends from the past and make new friends. Inside time, we can choose to declare independence from God. Inside time, we can choose to come to him in relationship. We can allow his Spirit to draw us close to him inside time. In eternity, those choices are fixed. In eternity, God honours the decisions we make in time to be with him or to walk away from him. He honours that in eternity. Hell is an identity that we actually choose in this life. It's not just a punishment for sin. Sin isn't telling a lie and stealing things and doing wrong stuff. Sin is declaring towards God, I just want to be independent from you. I don't need you, Jack. I'm going to do life my own way. And as a result of that, out comes all this other stuff. But what separates us from God is us declaring independence from him and not surrendering. And we have this gift called time to choose where we will spend and how we will spend eternity, with God or away from him. Because hell is just simply the absence of God. And in this earth, if you've had a really, really bad day, a bad week, a bad year where you've lost hope, it's a terrible place. That dark, dark place where you've lost hope. But see, in this world, God still exists. Eternity without hope, that's hell. And when Jesus returns, there will be a resurrection, but there will be a separation based on the decisions we make in time. It's a gift, what we do with this thing called time. And I want to read this last verse out. It's Jesus. He's talking to Martha just before Lazarus steps out of the grave. And he says this, I am the resurrection and the life. Every religion on planet Earth promises a utopia when we're dead, but not Jesus. When Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life, he's talking about the fullness of everything you could imagine on earth now, in his kingdom. That's available now. No religion on earth promises that, only Jesus. And then he says that I am going to give you a new body. I'm going to remake this planet earth, and God is going to come and dwell and make his dwelling amongst us. That's the promise that Jesus has given us. It's the story of the New Testament. It's why it's good news. That Jesus is the resurrection and the life. And he who believes in me will, even though he die, live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Then he looked at Martha and he made it really personal. He says, do you believe this? Do you believe this? Sometimes when it's hard to believe, but we want to, it's great to say to God, I believe, but help my unbelief. That's a really good prayer. Easter is not just an event in a Christian calendar. It's an event historically, and the whole power of Easter, the story of Easter, hangs on the resurrection of Jesus into a new body as the promise that that will be our experience as well. How good is that? Let's pray. Can I get the band up? Thanks. God, I thank you that you have invested your Son, your best, into this world because you have a big plan for this world to establish your kingdom, the culture of heaven, the values of heaven, the way that heaven operates on earth in the lives of human beings, that we could live out all that we really long to do. And it's because Jesus lives, we can face anything. Because he lives, we have hope. Because he has a new body, we know that we can have an improved model, an upgrade that we get to keep and doesn't wear out because he lives, because he lives, because he lives. Thank you, Jesus.